statements over the matter and the markets are well regulated. She further went on to say that one instance is not indicative of the India story, adding that the banking sector is strong and the investor confidence is high as well. Let's listen in.
Your budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. But the rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. There is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
I look at the budget for having covered all the sections of the society. We've tried, and it has been a detailing that which has consumed a lot of time in preparation of this budget. The details is what has brought the difference in touching so many different sectors and segments of our society. We've got something on offer for each one of them. So therefore, if it's being received very well, I'm very glad. But of course, that motivates me to be able to now take it upon myself to better implement it down to the last person who's aimed at. So I would think the impact of the budget, the immediate impact of the budget on the market, and subsequent to, let's say, for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will still continue to hold the markets high.
The opposition is taking aim at your government, saying that the banking and insurance companies have large exposure in Adani stocks. And the investors and the broader market is looking to you for some direction on this issue. Is our banking and insurance system resilient to take this shock?
I want to recall the words, coming from the horse's mouth has greater credibility. Both the SBI and LIC have issued detailed statements. And I know the chairperson or the CMD has himself come out and explained how they are not overexposed or whatever they said.
Yes.
And also said, look, we are sitting over profits for the exposure that we have, which is well within the limit. That's what I understand they have
Yes.
said, and I've again read it through the media.
They
have very clearly said that their exposure is very well within the permitted limits, and that they are, even now with the valuation falling as well, they are still sitting over profit. So if that is the horse's mouth, as I refer to, word from the horse's mouth, but in general, both with the RBI, we do have the Financial Stability Board's meeting, which happens once in 6 months. We meet, yes. Even recently we have met. So I can only very clearly say, both the RBI and we, because of the FSB's meeting, Financial Stability Board's meeting, know that the Indian banking system, if anything, at this stage, for me to use this word, I want to use it with a sense of responsibility, like having gone through the twin balance sheet problem. Indian banking sector today is at a comfortable level, with their NPAs coming down to absolutely low levels,
Yes.
recovery is happening, and their position is very sound, which gets reflected in the fact that when they go to raise monies in the market, they are absolutely comfortably raising monies as well. So the entire macroeconomic analysis which any expert would do also highlights the fact that how comfortable the Indian banks are placed in. That cannot be that if they are at risk.
Some of the global investors as well, as a knee-jerk reaction, seem to have pulled out some money in the last couple of days. Some have put, fresh investments on hold. What would your message be to the global investors?
India remains, as before, an absolutely well-governed, stable government, and also very well, regulated financial market. And as a result, I think the investor confidence which existed before shall continue even now. Our regulators are normally very, very stringent about certain governance practices, and therefore they should, one instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I would think is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. So many lessons have been learned over the decades, and therefore I think our regulators have kept our market well in prime and prim condition.
The finance minister there speaking first and exclusively to Network 18. Let's break down the fine print of what the finance minister has said. It has been a word of reassurance that has been given by the finance minister to the markets and the investors at large. The first headline is that one instance won't be indicative of our markets. This was the government's first response that we were getting as part of the Adani Saga is concerned. Now, the other headline is, and the big takeaway from what the finance minister has said, and this is as far as the question of what's happening as far as the exposure of both SBI and LIC is concerned, because that had rattled a lot of investors. There, the finance minister has said that both SBI and LIC have already issued detailed statements. The finance minister also going on to say that go back to the statements that have been issued by the management. The managements themselves have said that despite this saga, they're still sitting on profit despite the Adani fall. The finance minister also adding that you had the management and the CMDs of both SBI and LIC already explaining that they are not overexposed. So that should explain as far as the exposure of SBI and LIC is concerned. The other headline is that the exposure of both SBI and LIC, in fact, is within the permitted limits. And once again, highlighting that both of them are sitting on profits despite the valuations of the Adani Group actually follow. You should also remember at this point that you do have the central bank or the RBI that has also sought details from banks as far as the exposure to Adani firms is concerned. The other headline of what the finance minister has said, and she's reassured once again investors at large that the Indian banking sector is at a comfortable level. That's how well insulated our entire system is. And she's also further gone on to say that if you look at the macroeconomic analysis, and this is something that will be reiterated by experts as well, they're reassuring time and again that India in fact remains stable despite all the factors in mind. The finance minister has also added that India does have a very well-governed, regulated financial market, and that has been another word of reassurance that has come from the finance minister. Also going on to say that our regulators are already very stringent as far as practices are concerned, so the worry for the investors should be very, very minimum. The finance minister also further going on to say that the immediate impact of the budget will in fact hold the markets high. We did see that rally when the union budget was being announced, a bit of it being spoiled because of the Adani Saga. Before we bring in our guest, we're also getting some breaking developments coming in. You now have the SBI chairman's response as far as the ongoing Adani Saga is concerned, and this is what the management is saying, and I'm quoting, 0.88% of SBI's loan books is the total quantum of exposure to the Adani Group. Hence, we don't envisage any challenge. Let's listen in.
Group. While we read your statements that the exposure is within the large exposure framework limits, could you tell us more about what the absolute quantum is? If there's any sort of concern there, if you've increased provisions or will look to increase provisions because of what's been happening, with the stocks in the last few days?
Two questions which you have asked. I will answer the first question in terms of how the asset book look like. I expect our effort and endeavor would be to keep the credit cost as low as possible. And the kind of trend which you have seen for the past 2 quarters, our endeavor would be to keep the credit costs around the same levels. But also, I think I'm a bit bullish in terms of how the economy looks like. So that is one of the reasons why perhaps in the near term, in this quarter, perhaps we should be in a position to see that kind of a credit cost. And the quality of assets, I don't envisage any challenge in the quality of assets. Your second question in terms of exposure to Adani, we have lent to Adani for projects which are in fact having tangible assets and which are having adequate cash generation, and they have been in a position to meet their obligations. And as far as the quantum is concerned, that is actually just about 0.8, 0.9% of our total loan book. So from that point of view, we don't envisage any kind of a challenge in terms of their ability to service the loan obligations which they have taken. So, and also we have not extended any loan against shares, etc. There is no such portfolio which we have. So the impact of the stock market prices of the stocks will not really impact any of the margin calls, etc., and any of the loans which they have raised from us. As I mentioned, that it is all against sets which are cash generating and which are having excellent track record in terms of the repayment in the past.
So if you could actually elaborate, 0.9% of SBI's loan book is the total quantum of your exposure to Adani. If you could give us the absolute figures in terms of what is the fund-based and non-fund-based exposure in total to Adani.
It is everything put together.
So if you could give us the breakup.
I think non-fund based exposure, I would only like to mention that they are essentially letter of credit and the bank guarantees, and these bank guarantees are the performance bank guarantees. And this is not against any of the equity raising or any such activity. We actually breakup wise, maybe Swami, would you like to add something? If at all you have, or maybe you can.
Debt from us, and including a small investment of about 285 crores. So in all, the exposure total is about 0.88% as on 31st December. And as you clarified, sir, there is nothing which is against acquisition or against shares in this. If you require any other granular data point that we can share offline with you.
In fact, we have not issued any guarantee towards securing any of the financial obligations or acquisitions either.
So there you heard from the SBI management as far as their exposure to Adani is concerned, saying it's just about 0.88% of their loan book and they don't actually envisage any challenge. Let's also introduce our guests at this point. We have Gaurav Chaudhary, consulting editor, Network 18, and co-founder and CEO, Earshot Media. We also have Saket Mishra, economist. We also have Kishore Subramaniam, financial expert. Gentlemen, good to have all of you on the broadcast with us. I'll just request all of you to stay on with us because we also want to play out this another big takeaways of what the finance minister has told Network 18. We have CNBC TV 18's managing editor Shireen Bhan breaking down the big takeaways.
Well, as far as the markets today are concerned, we have closed in the positive territory, both the Sensex and the Nifty closing with significant gains. And to the point that was being made there specifically, and remember, this is the first reaction that the finance minister has given on the rout, the crisis that we have seen as far as the Adani Group stocks are concerned. The finance minister making it clear that this does not have a systemic risk involved, that this is not likely to impact either the banking sector or in fact LIC, because as the finance minister pointed out and what we have been reporting as well, LIC and SBI have both come out and said that their exposure is well within limits, but this is the first reaction coming in from the finance minister on what we have seen happen as far as the Adani Group is concerned. It has been a bloodbath. There's no other way to describe the kind of erosion that we have seen. But that apart, other interesting headlines that have come in from the finance minister on inflation, and remember, we have the Monetary Policy Committee meeting coming up. That's the next big event on the 8th of February. The MPC will decide whether to move higher on rates or pause. The finance minister there making it clear that she believes the decline that we have seen in inflation is not temporary. She believes that we are likely to see this sustain and hold. When, of course, asked where she sees interest rates, she did say that she doesn't want to comment because it would come across as nudging the Reserve Bank, which is something she doesn't want to do. Larger issue now is on what happens from here on. Is this likely to hold? We've got many statements that have been issued today. For instance, rating agencies Fitch and Moody. Fitch coming out and saying that they hold their rating as far as Adani Group is concerned and don't feel particularly perturbed on account of their ability to repay debt at this point in time. Moody's, though, coming out and saying that they believe that the recent developments will have a bearing as far as the Adani Group's ability to raise further capex is concerned, to raise further capital is concerned, and hence finance their further capex. So many statements, but this is, of course, a developing story. A lot will will also depend on what happens globally as well. Remember, the bonds have also taken a beating, and a significant beating in the global markets. But of course, this is a developing story. Today, though, a little bit of relief. But otherwise, as I pointed out, it has been a capitulation of enormous magnitude. You know, these are things that will weigh on the market's mind as well as the market sentiment. As I pointed out, there is so much by way of information and so many fresh developments that you're really seeing the markets react to each one of these on a minute-by-minute basis. So one will have to see whether the kind of fall that we have seen, is this really a bottom, so to speak? Has the floor been set, or are we going to see further fall in some of the stocks, in some companies like Ambuja, etc.? As many experts have pointed out, that their assets there are strong and solid, and hence perhaps the worst may be behind us, but I don't know. So we will have to track this story as it develops. But at this point in time, I think it's fair to say, and we're waiting now for SBI to come out with its results, and I'm sure that the SBI chairman will be asked questions about their exposure to the Adani Group, and maybe even officially quantify that exposure. So we will have to wait to see how this pans out, what fresh developments take place. But this is a moving story, and it's not a story that's done by any stretch of imagination.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the markets react come Monday. But let's begin the conversation with our guest. Saket, I want to come to you first. The finance minister there speaking exclusively to Network 18 on a whole host of issues, but more importantly, reacting for the first time as far as this entire Adani saga is concerned. The big takeaway of what the finance minister said, essentially, that the impact of the budget will still hold in the Indian markets despite the Adani saga, because one event will not determine how our markets move forward. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Completely, 500%. I mean, the Indian economy, first of all, is the macros are very strong. Some of the initiatives like the capex of the government that's been announced in the budget are going to drive demand as well as create an ecosystem for growth. So I would completely separate that from any short-term market fluctuations that happen because of the Adani episode. So I just think it is a big company, okay, but India is a lot bigger in the Indian economy, and its fundamentals are fairly strong, and therefore I don't see much impact.
Okay. Gaurav, I want to bring you in. Why this becomes crucial is on multiple levels, because there is a word of reassurance that's coming in from the finance minister, because, you know, understandably investors were spooked because of the kind of free fall that still continued with the Adani stocks. As far as specifically speaking about the exposure of both SBI and LIC, that was something that was playing on investors' minds. The finance minister there, mincing no words, saying that you already have the managements of the companies that have reacted. Now we're getting a statement from SBI management saying that if you look at the loan book, it's just about 0.88%. It's all in the permitted limits. Do you think when you have the finance minister there speaking as far as a limited exposure is concerned, that's going to go a long way as far as investor confidence is concerned?
It will. In fact, that is the finance minister spoke about how the SBI and LIC first they have come out and issued detailed statements, and now we have just heard the SBI chairman come out and give a quantified exposure of the SBI group in the Adani Group loan book. That's less than 0.9%. And the finance minister in the interview to Rahul obviously said that they are not overexposed. They have very clearly said that their exposure is well within the permitted limits. In fact, they're sitting on profits, and that is something that the SBI chairman today, right after the Q3 results, have actually reiterated and quantified those. And also, the financial did talk about the twin balance sheet problems, and that was one of the anxieties actually gripping both the investment community and also both the global investment community and the domestic investment community, as well as the banking community. Is if banks are over leveraged and the companies are not making profits, then it creates a twin balance sheet problem, because the balance sheets of both the borrower and the lender gets affected. India, according to the finance minister, seems to have come over it, and we overcome it, and we are now that the twin balance sheet problem is probably much behind us now. Also, importantly, as a reassurance to the investor community, particularly the global investor community, the finance minister has been absolutely clear. She did not mince words when she said that India remains very well governed, particularly a very well regulated financial sector, financial market. The regulators are very stringent about certain governance practices. And all this because so many lessons have been learned over the last several decades. It's not just a one-off thing. Adequate checks and balances are in place. It's very adequately ring-fenced, and the laws and the rules are extremely robustly defined and created. So it should not be a matter of concern that regulators such as the Reserve Bank of India or the Securities Exchange Board of India is going to take in a lenient view. They are not, because over the years we have seen that both the RBI and SEBI has demonstrated enormous institutional integrity in dealing with any kind of such situation. And that probably will remain true now. So the finance minister coming out and actually making that remark and reassuring investors probably will go a long way in bringing back confidence among the investor community. Pratima?
Yeah. Kishore, I also want to bring you in the conversation and agree with both the points that Gaurav was making as well as Saket was making, that when you have the finance minister coming out, it's very important because there is a word of reassurance, because despite everything, we did see a lot of investors pull out as well. So one, when the finance minister says that as far as exposure is concerned, that's within the permitted limits. And more importantly, our regulation system is also very stringent. We are also well insulated as far as an institution is concerned. Do you then think the pullout is going to stabilize in the weeks to come?
Okay, coming to answer about, first of all, I agree with both your panelists, Mr. Gaurav and the other gentleman. At a macro level, India is extremely safe and we need not worry. Answering your question pointed, these types of news or event-based trigger where the market goes up and down in a particular stock is either shorted by institutional or individual retail traders. You need to understand that stock market volatility, which is we call in the technical terms as VIX, is determined very event-based. So at a larger level, at a macro level, this is not going to have any impact on the economy, point number one. Point number two, will it settle tomorrow, Monday, day after? We do not know. There is nobody can actually answer that. But what is important is that you remember when there is a bloodbath, and that too specifically for one particular company, there are a lot of day traders who are now trying to make money in this game, because everybody who is in the market, at least the trading community, is trying for news where they can make money. And let me also clarify one more thing, not going into the details of the Hindenburg research or the report or the credibility. One thing I would like to say, let's not forget the fundamental that Hindenburg has shorted this stock. So you need to understand that they are also wanting the stock to go down so that they can buy at some level. Now, one thing we also need to remember that SBI, there are rumors floating up, WhatsApp universities are on and everybody is saying whatever they like. You need to understand that large institutions like LIC and SBI do not fund on somebody's recommendation, phone call or push. It is backed by assets, it's backed by cash flow. Is the stock overpriced or not? Obviously, yes, it was overpriced. But let's not take it beyond to the Indian economy. I think the finance minister was clear. We are an isolated spot of growth in the world. And this episode is an isolated blot or a small dark spot, which we will tide over very soon. When? I don't know.
I think that's very well put by Kishore. And Saket, this is where I want to bring you back in the conversation. As far as the broader picture of what the finance minister was saying, one, she was saying that we should not see this as a representation of where our markets are or where our economy is. Specifically, as far as inflation is concerned, this is something that we'd heard in the economic survey as well, that it's well within the targets as far as the central bank is concerned. And today also the finance minister is saying that that decline that we've seen is in fact not temporary. She believes that that's going to be sustained. Yes, we do have a monetary policy committee. We'll have to see which way the central bank goes. But as far as inflation and the decline is concerned, do you agree with the finance minister that this is not temporary and this is something that the Indian economy will be able to hold going forward?
Well, I'd say the probability is definitely on the side of inflation continuing to taper downwards. The global demand scenario, along with the measures that the RBI has taken in terms of controlling inflation, are showing an impact. Core inflation also, I think your channel also discussed this earlier, core inflation seems to be under control also. So I think the trend is definitely looks like it's going to hold towards lower inflation. I would just highlight the big risk in all this is what the economic surveys also said, that if China suddenly starts to go super fast in terms of its recovery, there may be an impact in terms of commodity prices, which can obviously hurt us. But other than that, I'd say we are getting inflation, where not just us. I think globally, inflation is coming under control, and clearly India is a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of having it under control.
Okay. Gaurav, I want to bring you also back in the conversation, going back as far as the Adani Saga is concerned. Despite the free fall and the bloodbath, and there is no mincing on what we've seen over the last couple of days, there was a slight recovery by the time the week ended. How do you see the markets opening come Monday?
It will be difficult to hazard a guess on which way the markets, how the markets are going to behave, and which way the Adani stocks, particularly Adani Enterprises, are going to behave. But after several sessions of getting routed, Adani Enterprises stocks actually ended in the green today. And that also actually, there was also a sharp reaction in the positive reaction in the overall market and the broader indices after the finance minister spoke to News18 Network 18. And that reassurance seems to be having a very reassuring effect on markets, on the broader markets. So just a point on what Saket said on inflation. And I think in the finance minister, while the economic survey did flag possible inflationary concerns if China gathers pace. In fact, the budget also actually flags this, and it's buried in one of the paragraphs in the medium-term fiscal policy statement, that the headwinds of global developments, particularly if China gathers pace, then the commodity prices could actually rise. So that could actually end up raising fuel prices for India, because we import about 75% of our crude oil requirements. So the land cost of crude imports going out means it's going to knock up overall inflation. And that is why when the finance minister said that we need to be realistic about our GDP growth, because those have to be tempered with the emerging global situation. So she probably meant that, because the budget actually assumes nominal GDP growth rate of 10.5%. So if you're assuming that over a 12-month period, our GDP deflator, which is a proxy for inflation, is about 4.5%, then probably we are looking at about 6% real GDP growth rate, which is towards the lower end of what the economic survey projected. But that still will make India stand out as the fastest growing, because none of the major economies are going to grow at such a rapid pace. And given the size of the Indian economy, I think that should be quite commendable.
True. And that's why I said the word of reassurance is very important on multiple levels, not just putting the government's stand as far as the Adani Saga is concerned, but also putting out the information as it is for investors at large. I'll leave the conversation there. Appreciate all our guests taking out the time and joining us here on CNN News 18. Time for us to slip into a very short break. Don't go anywhere. We're coming back with lots more.
The biggest budget exclusive. FM's first post-budget interview to a private news network. What does the budget mean for the investor, the consumer, the taxpayer, the economy? FM Nirmala Sitharaman speaks to Network 18 Editor-in-Chief Rahul Joshi. The FM interview exclusive on CNN News 18.
Right now, as we pull up on a year since it began, and the million-dollar question everyone's asking, how is this likely to end?
Well, Zach, as you have said, it is almost a year since Russia invaded Ukraine, and it has been very brutal and cruel, and not simply on the battlefield, but we also see Russia attacking civilian infrastructure throughout the winter. What they can't win on the battlefield, they're trying to win by freezing Ukrainians and cutting off the water, but Ukraine is standing strong and is fighting back hard. We and our allies and partners in the 50-some country coalition that supports Ukraine have understood that Russia could end this war any day if it stopped fighting. So if Russia stopped fighting, the war would end. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And so, as you saw when the President and President Zelensky met in Washington in December, the Ukrainians are committed to continuing to try to fight for their land, and we are now trying to get them what they will need to launch a successful winter and spring offensive, because currently the map on the ground does not favor them.
So I'm curious to know, in this context, what the U.S. position is vis-a-vis India's stand. India's not necessarily always taken the position that Western countries have taken on this conflict, and in particular about the import of Russian oil. Russia, which was selling less than 1% of India's energy needs before this war began, and now it's India's largest energy supplier. I'm curious to know, have you had those conversations with your Indian counterparts?
So we've been having very rich conversations with India throughout this period, including before the war began, when we were worried about it. As you know better than I, India has historic dependencies that go back to the Soviet period, particularly in the security sphere. Almost all of India's weaponry comes from Russia and the Soviet Union. Now you see, not only is Russia not going to be in a position to resupply, but the weapons aren't working too well out there. So we've been having the conversation about diversifying away from that kind of dependency, doing more with the U.S. and with other friends in the defense sector. And of course, on the energy side, India, as you know, buys on the spot market, so it always goes for the best price. So one of the things that we've been talking about before and during and after the decision on an oil price cap by many of us was that this would actually benefit India. So even though you're buying more Russian oil, the fact that you're paying cheaper prices for it is good for India, but it also dries up the revenue that would otherwise contribute to Putin's war machine. So, this is where we are now. You're going to buy your oil from somewhere. What we want to ensure is that you're not fueling the war.
I started off by saying that this is India's G20 year. It's a big
big year.
Year for India. You must have seen billboards and hoardings all around town talking about the G20. The last G20 in Bali was sort of overshadowed by this war. Do you reckon in 8 months' time, when India hosts the G20, we would have been seeing the end of this war, or will that still be the dominant theme, as it were?
Zaka, if I had a crystal ball, I would love for the Ukrainian people for this conflict to be over. But I think what's more important is that as host of the G20, India has a hugely strong role to play in the message that all of the big democracies are sending to the two big autocracies that are trying to change the rules of the road by force and coercion, whether it's Russia or whether it's China. So we've been doing a lot of talking together with India as you get ready to host about the things that we need to work on together. We need to ensure resiliency in our supply chains. We need to ensure that China can't continue to indebt countries and not follow the global rules of the road there. I'm off to Sri Lanka after this. We talked about that, about our responsibilities for some of the challenges, whether it is in health. We've worked together on COVID. We're now working together on food security, which is obviously exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine. We have other work together to do to ensure resilient supply chains. Some of that work is being kicked off this week, in fact, by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and National Security Advisor Doval. So a lot of things that we're doing together bilaterally are also enhanced by the fact that India is chairing the G20 this year.
I want to talk about the other autocracy, as you called it. There's been this ongoing standoff between India and China for the better part of the last 2 years. What is your best understanding of why China has tried to unilaterally change the status quo?
Well, obviously we oppose any unilateral efforts to, whether it's civilian, military, to change the status quo. I'm not going to speak for why China's doing what it is doing, but obviously it would be far better to try to settle these issues at the diplomatic table. In the past, India has had some success there, and I know that you are continuing to try, and we encourage that.
Just to take that conversation forward, the Indo-Pacific, of course, is a big priority for the United States, as indeed it is for India. Where do you see the future of Quad? We're already seeing countries like Japan, for example, which is a pacifist constitution, did not have an aggressive standing army, now really thinking seriously about changing that posture. Do you see an increasing militarization of the Indo-Pacific?
Well, we're trying to do actually the opposite, Zaka. We're trying to ensure through the cooperation that we have, India, Australia, Japan, US, to preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific, not only in our own interest, but in global interest. 50% of global trade goes through the Taiwan Straits. So the work that we do in Quad is about keeping things open, keeping them free, but it's also about advancing maritime security, it's about advancing climate goals, it's advancing food security, all of these kinds of things that the democracies need to work on together, even as the autocracies work to change the global rules of the road.
You talked about Taiwan. There is increasing concern that there could be some kind of a military flare-up between China and Taiwan. We even had recently an American general say that in 2025 there's going to be a military action between China and Taiwan. What are the conversations you're having with the Chinese and with the Taiwanese to try and avoid that situation?
As you know, Zaka, President Biden sat down with President Xi Jinping last autumn in Bali to try to talk president to president about our responsibilities as big powers to maintain peace, to maintain stability, about the fact that, you know, our One China policy and the Taiwan Relations Act together have kept the peace, have been a status quo situation that has helped us all avoid conflict for decades and decades and decades.
Welcome back. Thanks a lot for staying with us. Some breaking developments coming in. Now, we all know the situation as far as the Pakistan economy is concerned. It is sinking and the country is finding it difficult to bail out itself from the crisis. But that hasn't stopped Pakistan from its Kashmir rhetoric. Pakistan continues to spend on anti-India plot. Pakistan has prepared a detailed toolkit to spread fake narrative and propaganda on social media to commemorate the so-called Kashmir Solidarity Day on the 5th of February. Now, the propaganda material has been sent to all Pakistani missions globally, and missions have been asked to publish the same on their social media handles as well. Let's bring in our colleague Tejinder Singh Sodhi, who in fact has been tracking these developments for us. So instead of figuring out how to save themselves from their crippling economy and the crisis that only continues to escalate, Pakistan's obsession and desperation with Kashmir as an end.
Yes, Ridhima, you rightly pointed out that the obsession of Pakistan as far as India and Kashmir is concerned does not seem to end. At a time when Pakistan in itself is in a mess, you see the economy in Pakistan is in shambles. They are going from country to country with a begging ball. But the reality of Pakistan is that on one hand, while Pakistan continues to sponsor terrorism in the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, on the other hand, Pakistan has not stopped the propaganda, the narrative which Pakistan tries to build against India globally. Now at CNN News 18, we have exposed this Pakistani toolkit wherein Pakistan Foreign Ministry has asked all the embassies, all the missions of Pakistan globally to propagate the anti-India narrative. Rather, a toolkit has been prepared and which has been officially sent to all these embassies of Pakistan, all these missions of Pakistan globally, and they have been asked to publish these propaganda material on their social media handles. Not only this, the embassies and missions the globe have been asked to hold seminars, symposiums, so as to portray the so-called sorry state of affairs in the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir, wherein Pakistan has closed its eyes toward the reality that people in Jammu and Kashmir are happy. They have happily accepted the changes which have been brought in the Union territory after the abrogation of Article 370. Yes, Abdima.
Yeah. I agree with the points that you're making, Tejinder. We leave the conversation there. Thanks a lot for getting us all those details. Shifting focus then, the United States has gone on to allege that a suspected Chinese spy balloon was spotted flying over Montana for a couple of days. Now, after United States, Canada has also claimed potential second incident linked to surveillance balloon. Now, remember, this comes just days ahead of US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's planned trip to Beijing, which is on the 5th of February. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has also issued a statement stating that it is tracking a Chinese spy balloon. The United States has summoned Chinese diplomats over the spy balloon, while China's state-affiliated media Global Times has mocked the mystery balloon over United States, denying the claims made by the United States. It is also important to note that the discovery of the balloon puts a further strain on the relations between United States and China.
中国是负责任的国家，一贯严格遵守国际法，无意侵犯任何主权国家的领土和领空。关于这个气球的问题，刚刚我已经讲了，我们正在了解核实情况，希望双方能够共同冷静谨慎处理。
More alarming side is this was put here at purpose, at this time, in order to message, and that would be something we'd have to look at. Satellites can do a lot of good work and maybe even better work than this balloon. But what we don't know is what exactly is the balloon carrying and what is it trying to sense or collect. We have a pretty good idea what goes up on satellites and we sort of understand. But when you get a big package like this that can carry a lot of kit, it's concerning to know what they're actually after.
It's pretty clear that China and President Xi have obviously been a lot more aggressive about their military presence, South China Sea, their threats on Taiwan, their approach generally to governing has been much more aggressive than in the past. And it raises concerns. And for that reason, I think it's very important for the United States to be taking whatever steps are necessary in order to be able to deal with whatever threat China represents.
So what really is this spy balloon saga, and what are the kind of claims that are coming in from the United States? What really is the Pentagon hinting? They're of course hinting at a Chinese involvement and at a Chinese hand. Let's talk to you about the claims that are being made by the United States. They're saying that a tracking surveillance balloon can be seen over Montana. The second claim that has also been made is that Chinese surveillance balloon is seen over northwestern United States. Now, spy balloons are not anything new. They actually date back to the Cold War, and they were used quite aggressively during the First World War as well. But the timing of when these claims are being made is very, very crucial. And this is what most experts within the United States are also saying. This comes right before that visit of Antony Blinken to Beijing, which is on the 5th of February. The other claim that is also being made by the United States at this point is that is the distance that the balloon has traveled according to them. They are saying the balloon traveled from China to various islands and then Montana. The other claim that the United States is also making is that the balloon traveled well above the commercial air traffic. Now, if you talk to experts, they'll tell you about the height of how these spy balloons actually fly. For commercial air traffic, the height is about 40,000 feet. For these balloons, it can go up anywhere between 80,000 to 1,20,000. Claim 5 that is also being made here is that it is raised it with Beijing through diplomatic channels. As of now, China has not responded to the aggressive claims that are being made by the United States. But as I said, what is the significance of the claims that are being made? Also, more importantly, when these claims are being made. Let's break down the details of what is the significance of these claims that are being made by United States at this point of time. They're of course saying and suggesting that there is a Chinese hand that is suspected. The incident is ahead of that very crucial visit of Antony Blinken to Beijing. Remember, you've also got a group of senators within the United States who've also raised concerns as far as China's behavior is concerned, and they want this to be raised when this visit to Beijing does happen. The other significance is the revelation as tensions rise between both these nations. So can these claims actually further hinder the relationship between both the countries? That's the larger question. The third point here is that the aggression that is being pointed out by the United States over the manner in which China is behaving. They're saying the provocation after United States denounced China's Taiwan stance. The other significance that is crucial to note here is increase in Beijing's espionage attempts, alleged that US senators' significance incident amid US calling China biggest geopolitical challenge. So how much of these claims will actually have an impact when this visit of Antony Blinken does happen in Beijing? Let's also bring in our guest to try and understand how we should read the kind of claims that are being put forward by United States, and will this actually have any impact when that visit does happen. We have Dr. Andrew K.P. Ling, international and independent China strategist, who is joining us. We also have Lieutenant General retired K.J. Singh, former General Officer commanding the GOC in Western Command. Good to have both of you on the broadcast with us. Andrew, let me begin the conversation with you. Many experts within the United States saying this is the manner in which China works. It is extremely aggressive, and the timing of when all of this is happening cannot be ignored. This is a message that is being sent out by China before that scheduled visit of Antony Blinken.
Well, I don't think that this is timing, because you look at this incident. It's a balloon, a high altitude balloon, and it's over Montana. If you look at the map, how far Montana is from China, it would take days for the balloon to travel. So I don't think that this is specifically timed, because the final visit date and all the details were only finalized only pretty recently. So I don't think that China would just send a balloon over to what purpose? Because as far as five planes and balloons are concerned, as admitted in the New York Times article, all countries are doing it. And in fact, China, or for that matter, the United States, could get more intelligence rather than just balloons. In the balloons is a low-tech kind of technology. But of course, this incident is China's response is non-committal so far. They said, well, let's go science, let's stay calm, and we're trying to get to the bottom of this. And no doubt this will be brought up in the meeting, in the visit of Secretary of State Blinken.
Okay. General Singh, let me also bring you in the conversation. As I pointed out earlier, spy balloons are not new. Many experts have pointed out as to why countries continue to use them. Of course, logistically and in terms of costs also, they work better vis-a-vis satellites. But the timing of these claims that are being made by the United States, do you really think it can be dismissed or mocked the way China has done it at this point?
Firstly, Jai Hind, and thank you for having me on your channel. See, you have to look at it in three dimensions. One is technical dimension. Now, such balloons are low-tech. They do not have sort of that kind of capability. What this balloon can do can easily be done by satellites. It can even be done better by that satellite. The second issue is the issue with regard to messaging. What is China trying to convey in this? Is China, it's a visible thing. It's at that altitude, it doesn't interfere with civil aviation traffic. It is 40,000 feet, 12,000 meters and above, but a huge big signature.
Yeah.
Americans can easily shoot it down if they wish to. But then they don't want to up the ante. They are also confused what is happening, what kind of payload it's carrying. And the third aspect is that it is, in my understanding, a manifestation of psychological dimension of what China is doing around its neighbors. Over Taiwan, there are every day there are air space intrusions, large number of aircrafts take off. They try to intimidate Taiwan, and all over the South China Sea, such an environment prevails.
Okay.
So here, just before the visit, see, your international expert is right. Such a balloon will take a long time to travel there. It would have drifted there, and was it timed with the visit or not? And the better thing is, why doesn't China tell the Americans what they're doing or what they're not doing, at least build some confidence into the whole exercise.
Yeah, that's exactly the question that I was asking, Andrew, when I started, General, that, rather than mocking it, why don't you come clear with what really is happening? Because it's not just the United States. You have a second claim that is in fact being made by Canada of a potential incident as well. And as I said, the timing cannot be ignored, because just yesterday, we in fact had put out that news story here on CNN News 18, how you have a group of senators who raised concerns over China's behavior, its practices that are not legal as far as trade practices are concerned or even human rights violations are concerned. So China does know that the pressure is being built up. But Andrew, do you see this entire saga having any impact on that visit when Antony Blinken is in Beijing?
No, because the relationship between the United States and China is reached the worst point in history. This cannot be worse. And it's not just because of the satellite. And I think the likelihood is just coincidence. I don't think that the Blinken visit is going to spend too much time on this. All is likely to be brought up. But the main issue is how to prevent this worsening relationship between China and the United States from into war, and putting guardrails so that both sides could understand the red lines a little bit better. But I don't think that having said that, hold high hopes for any outcome for this visit, because the confrontation is so entrenched between both sides.
Okay, we'll have to see how that visit also pans out, and we'll also have to see whether this does have an impact on the deteriorating relationships between both the nations. Unfortunately, I will have to leave that conversation there. Appreciate both our guests taking up the time and joining us here on CNN News 18. Time for us to slip into a very short break. We're coming back with lots more.
Budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. The rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. There is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
The immediate impact of the budget on the market, let's say for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will still continue to hold the market back.
Strong and is fighting back hard. We and our allies and partners in the 50-some country coalition that supports Ukraine have understood that Russia could end this war any day if it stopped fighting. So if Russia stopped fighting, the war would end. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And so, as you saw when the President and President Zelensky met in Washington in December, the Ukrainians are committed to continuing to try to fight for their land, and we are now trying to get them what they will need to launch a successful winter and spring offensive, because currently the map on the ground does not favor them.
So I'm curious to know, in this context, what the U.S. position is vis-a-vis India's stand. India has not necessarily always taken the position that Western countries have taken on this conflict, and in particular about the import of Russian oil. Russia, which was selling less than 1% of India's energy needs before this war began, and now it's India's largest energy supplier. I'm curious to know, have you had those conversations with your Indian counterparts?
So we've been having very rich conversations with India throughout this period, including before the war began, when we were worried about it. As you know better than I, India has historic dependencies that go back to the Soviet period, particularly in the security sphere. Almost all of India's weaponry comes from Russia and the Soviet Union. Now you see, not only is Russia not going to be in a position to resupply, but the weapons aren't working too well out there. So we've been having the conversation about diversifying away from that kind of dependency, doing more with the U.S. and with other friends in the defense sector. And of course, on the energy side, India, as you know, buys on the spot market, so it always goes for the best price. So one of the things that we've been talking about before and during and after the decision on an oil price cap by many of us was that this would actually benefit India. So even though you're buying more Russian oil, the fact that you're paying cheaper prices for it is good for India, but it also dries up the revenue that would otherwise contribute to Putin's war machine. So, this is where we are now. You're going to buy your oil from somewhere. What we want to ensure is that you're not fueling the war.
I started off by saying that this is India's G20 year. It's a big
Very big year.
Year for India. You must have seen billboards and hoardings all around town talking about the G20. The last G20 in Bali was sort of overshadowed by this war. Do you reckon in 8 months' time, when India hosts the G20, we would have been seeing the end of this war, or will that still be the dominant theme, as it were?
Zaka, if I had a crystal ball, I would love for the Ukrainian people for this conflict to be over. But I think what's more important is that as host of the G20, India has a hugely strong role to play in the message that all of the big democracies are sending to the two big autocracies that are trying to change the rules of the road by force and coercion, whether it's Russia or whether it's China. So we've been doing a lot of talking together with India as you get ready to host about the things that we need to work on together. We need to ensure resiliency in our supply chains. We need to ensure that China can't continue to indebt countries and not follow the global rules of the road there. I'm off to Sri Lanka after this. We talked about that, about our responsibilities for some of the challenges, whether it is in health. We've worked together on COVID. We're now working together on food security, which is obviously exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine. We have other work together to do to ensure resilient supply chains. Some of that work is being kicked off this week, in fact, by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and National Security Advisor Doval. So a lot of things that we're doing together bilaterally are also enhanced by the fact that India is chairing the G20 this year.
I want to talk about the other autocracy, as you called it. There's been this ongoing standoff between India and China for the better part of the last 2 years. What is your best understanding of why China has tried to unilaterally change the status quo?
Well, obviously we oppose any unilateral efforts to, whether it's civilian, military, to change the status quo. I'm not going to speak for why China's doing what it is doing, but obviously it would be far better to try to settle these issues at the diplomatic table. In the past, India has had some success there, and I know that you are continuing to try, and we encourage that.
Just to take that conversation forward, the Indo-Pacific, of course, is a big priority for the United States, as indeed it is for India. Where do you see the future of Quad? We're already seeing countries like Japan, for example, which is a pacifist constitution, did not have an aggressive standing army. Now they're really thinking seriously about changing that posture. Do you see an increasing militarization of the Indo-Pacific?
Well, we're trying to do actually the opposite, Zaka. We're trying to ensure through the cooperation that we have, India, Australia, Japan, US, to preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific, not only in our own interest, but in global interest. 50% of global trade goes through the Taiwan Straits. So the work that we do in Quad is about keeping things open, keeping them free, but it's also about advancing maritime security, it's about advancing climate goals, it's advancing food security, all of these kinds of things that the democracies need to work on together, even as the autocracies work to change the global rules of the road.
You talked about Taiwan. There is increasing concern that there could be some kind of a military flare-up between China and Taiwan. We even had recently an American general say that in 2025 there's going to be a military action between China and Taiwan. What are the conversations you're having with the Chinese and with the Taiwanese to try and avoid that situation?
As you know, Zaka, President Biden sat down with
Welcome back. Thanks a lot for staying with us. Some breaking developments coming in. We're now understanding Youth Congress and the BGYM workers are protesting outside the Kerala Secretariat against the Kerala state budget. Police are also using water cannon on protesters. Let me bring in my colleague Neetu, who's been tracking these developments for us. Neetu, what really is happening?
See, both the Youth Congress as well as the BJP Yuv Morcha workers had taken out a protest march towards the state secretariat. Now, this is against the state budget. As we know that the budget was presented today, there have been a series of sets, including a 2 rupee increase in petrol and diesel, and also in Indian-made foreign liquor, also in terms of purchasing vehicles. Fair price value of land has increased. So the opposition leader V.D. Satishan himself have termed this as terrorism. That the
so as of now, water cannons also being used against these protesters. Neetu, I apologize for interrupting. We'll have to leave that conversation there. We've completely run out of time. It's a wrap from my side. News continues here on CNN News 18. Good evening, hello and welcome to Plain Speak. I'm Anusha Soni. The Assam government has launched a massive crackdown against child marriages in the state of Assam. The state chief minister Himanta Biswa Sarma put out the details, asserting that action will be taken against all individuals responsible for this heinous crime. About 2,000 people and more have been arrested so far. That's what the state DGP has stated. The highest number of arrests have been reported from certain districts including Dhubri, Barpeta and Nagaon. Now, the state of Assam is one of the worst performers on certain indices such as the maternal mortality rate and the infant mortality rate. The move of the government aims to target child marriages, which seem to be the root cause of this performance. But the move is not without its controversy. Political opponents argue that it's targeted towards a particular community, while the government vehemently denies such charges. Let's explore various layers and facets of this debate by first understanding the fundamentals, laws that govern child marriages across the country. What does the law of the land say? Is the state government right in doing what it's doing? Our first focus, laws that govern child marriage. What does it entail? That's our focus. Now, the legal marriage age in India for a girl is 18 and for a boy is 21 years of age. Now, whoever performs or conducts or directs child marriages shall be punished with a rigorous imprisonment of 2 years and a fine that can go up to 1 lakh rupees. That's what the law of the land says. Child marriages are valid if child doesn't declare it void at 18. That's a very important point to understand, that child marriages are not void ab initio. They need to be declared illegal once the ceremony has been solemnized. But what happens when there are provisions of POCSO that are involved? This is a petition which is pending at the Supreme Court of India. The NCPCR, the child rights body, has raised this matter of the Supreme Court, that various practices under personal law, including the Muslim personal law, that permit the marriage of underage girls, that should be struck down. So what should prevail? That's the key question that we are asking. POCSO. If a girl is getting married between 15 and 18 years, it can be a victim of penetrative sexual assault. This is the law of the land. That's what POCSO says, that sex with a girl under the age of 18 is an offence. It has to be counted as sexual assault. Personal laws permit that. As I said, Muslim personal law permits the marriage of a girl who attains puberty, 15 years or more. That's something which is allowed. Let's move on. NCPCR, as I said, has moved the Supreme Court of India. It has contested various High Court judgments that have allowed such marriages under Muslim personal law. Various conflicting judgments of the High Court have said that perhaps this is something, a customary practice that has been accepted. There was a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court in 2017 that read down the exception under the Indian Penal Code that allowed a wife of over 15 years of age, and if the between the sex between a husband and a wife is below 15 years of age, that shall be counted as rape, as sexual assault if the wife is less than 18 years of age. That was a landmark ruling that had come in. So, as far as the entire journey and trajectory and evolution of laws in this country is concerned, not talking about all aspects of the personal law, but one particular aspect, which is about marriage of underage girls, the evolution seems to be moving in the direction that